The first arrow took the mule through the neck before Charles Walker even understood the road had gone quiet. He was down in the mud a heartbeat later, satchel of bandages and tinctures spilling across the frozen ruts of Stonebridge Crossing, and above him the air was suddenly full of screaming and the wet thud of shafts finding flesh. He had crossed this bridge 100 times ferrying medicine between Last Light Station and the mining camps of Greystone Quarry, and never once had it looked like this. 6 men in mismatched leathers pouring out from behind the stone rail on either side, and in the middle of the span, alone, an orc woman with a broken spear in one hand and an arrow already buried to the fletching in her thigh. She did not fall. That was the first thing Charles noticed, even as he scrambled backward on his hands through the slush. She swayed, planted her boot, and swung the broken spear haft with enough force to crack a man's skull through his helmet, and she did it while blood ran black down her leg and pooled in the snow beneath her. "Get off the bridge," she roared at him, in common thick with the growl of her own tongue, not even looking at him. "This is not your fight, little healer." He should have run. Every instinct screamed at him to run, back toward Last Light Station and the garrison bell, because 6 armed men against 1 wounded orc were not odds a man survived by staying, and he was no soldier. He was a field surgeon, 31 years old, hands built for needle and thread, not blade. But he had spent 11 years stitching men back together after the border skirmishes, had held enough dying soldiers to know the particular sound a person made when they were about to lose too much blood to keep fighting, and she was making that sound now, a ragged catch in her breath between blows. Charles Walker did not run. He grabbed the only weapon within reach, the iron pry bar from his cart, meant for splitting crates of dried herbs, and threw himself at the nearest attacker's knees, taking the man down in a tangle of limbs onto the bridge stone. It bought her 3 seconds. She used them to drive the spear haft through another man's throat and pivot, and by the time the last 2 attackers realized the numbers had shifted, they were already breaking, dragging their wounded back into the tree line, shouting something in an orcish dialect Charles didn't know. Silence came down over the bridge like a dropped curtain. Somewhere below, the gorge river hissed against the ice at its banks. The orc woman staggered, and this time she did fall, one knee cracking against the stone, her hand pressed white-knuckled over the arrow in her thigh. Charles was already moving before he decided to. "Don't pull it," he said, sliding to his knees beside her, and she turned on him with a snarl bright enough to freeze his blood tusks bared, amber eyes blazing, the look of something that had survived by never trusting a hand offered in kindness. "Touch me and I break your fingers, human. Then break them after I get this arrowhead out clean, because if you pull it yourself you'll tear the artery and bleed out on this bridge in about 4 minutes. He said it flatly, the way he said everything to frighten patients, because panic fed on panic and calm was the only medicine that worked on both of them at once. "I'm a surgeon. Not a soldier, not a bounty man, not one of theirs. Let me help you or don't, but decide fast because you're losing color." For a long moment she only stared at him, chest heaving, blood soaking dark through the leather at her thigh. He registered distantly, even through the fear singing in his own veins, extraordinary to look at, tall enough to meet his eyes sitting down that he was standing, shoulders and arms roped with muscle beneath fitted travel leathers, a bodice of dark oiled hide studded at the ribs that clung to a figure no armor could fully disguise, high boots laced to the knee, a fur-trimmed mantle clasped at one shoulder and thrown back to leave her weapon arm bare. Her black hair was braided close to her scalp in 3 thick plaits threaded through with small bones and beads, the marks, he would later learn, of honors earned and honors owed. Her skin held the green-gray of weathered granite, and even bleeding on a frozen bridge with strangers' blood on her knuckles, she looked like something carved rather than born. "Fine," she said at last, through her teeth. "Fast, human." He worked fast. He had a strip of clean linen wound tight above the wound in under 10 seconds, his little belt knife already flame-warmed from the lantern he lit with shaking hands. And he talked the whole time, low and even, telling her exactly what he was about to do before he did it. Because men, and apparently, orc women held still better when they weren't surprised. She hissed once, a long shuddering breath through bared teeth, when the arrowhead came free, and then she simply watched him work, her amber eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made his neck heat despite the cold. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she said finally, as he packed the wound and bound it. "My mother used to say the two were rarely different in practice." He tied off the linen and sat back on his heels, breathing hard, adrenaline only now catching up to him in a fine tremor through his hands. Charles Walker, field surgeon out of Last Light Station. She studied him a moment longer as if deciding whether the name was worth keeping. "Tana Skybreaker," she said, "of Clan Stonehide." And then, before he could ask anything more, she was trying to stand, favoring the bound leg, jaw tight with the effort of not showing pain in front of him. "I cannot stay on this bridge. Others will come. I have 3 days to reach Kelbridge Hold before the proving begins, and I have already lost half a day to those dogs. You can't walk on that leg for 3 days. I have walked on worse. Not on my stitching, you haven't." He got to his feet, offered a hand she did not take, and found himself saying words he had not planned before they left his mouth. "Last Light Station is 2 hours north. I have a proper table, clean water, and a bed that isn't a snowbank. You rest there tonight, I check the wound doesn't fester, and tomorrow I'll guide you through the low road myself. I know every switchback and shelter cave between here and Kelbridge, better than any map you're carrying. 6 men just tried to kill you in broad daylight on an open bridge. You'll need more than a spear half to make it there alive." She looked at him then the way a wolf looks at a man who has just offered to walk into its den with it, wary, assessing, faintly incredulous. "Why would you help an orc outlaw cross the border, healer? Your people do not love mine. I have seen the stocks in your towns. I have seen what is done to orcs found alone on your roads." "I'm not helping an outlaw," Charles said, and meant it. "I'm helping a woman who just took an arrow rather than run from 6 men, and who apparently has somewhere important she needs to be. What happens after we reach Kelbridge is your business. What happens on the road between here and there is mine, because I'm the only healer for 40 miles and you are currently my patient." Something in her face shifted, not trust, not yet, but the smallest crack in the armor of suspicion, there and gone so fast he almost didn't catch it. "Lead on then, healer," Tana Skybreaker said. "But if you are lying, I will know before the 2nd mile, and I promise you will not enjoy how I find out." He believed her completely, and found to his own surprise that he was smiling anyway. The walk to Last Light Station took longer than 2 hours with her legs slowing them, and Charles used the time to learn what he could without prying too hard, because a woman freshly stitched and freshly ambushed did not owe a stranger her whole history. What she gave him, in short clipped sentences between labored breaths, was this: Clan Stonehide had held the Highhold Pass and its rich ore seams for 3 generations under the old Kelbridge Accord, the treaty that let human Ironreach Kingdom and the Orc clanholds of the Skyreach Mountains share the border corridor without endless war. 6 months passed. A supply caravan bound for the Ironreach garrisons had been raided in the pass, goods stolen, drivers killed, and Clan Stonehide had been blamed, stripped of its standing, barred from the pass, its honor debts called in by rival clans circling like wolves scenting a wounded herd. Tana did not believe her people had done it. She was almost certain she knew who had, though proving it was another matter entirely. And in the meantime, the only path left to reclaim Stonehide's hold and honor was the proving at Kelbridge, the annual trial of champions, held under treaty law before both kingdom and clanholds, where a single victor's clan won or kept the pass for the year to come. "And if you lose," Charles asked, "then Stonehide is finished. No hold, no standing, no honor. My grandmother's bones are buried in that pass. I will not let Draven Ironjaw dance on them." Draven Ironjaw, That's the one who framed you." She did not answer that directly, only set her jaw and kept walking, and Charles decided not to push further, filing the name away like a splinter to be dug out later. Last Light Station sat where the road bent around a shoulder of gray stone, a fortified way station of timber and rough-cut rock, with a beacon tower rising from its northern corner, one of a dozen such towers strung along the Greywatch March, to signal warning fires down the whole border corridor. Charles's infirmary occupied the low stone building nearest the gate, and he brought Tana in through the side door rather than the main yard, aware even as he did it of exactly how such a sight would look to the garrison men lounging by the fire pit. A field surgeon walking in arm's length of an armed orc woman, blood on both their hands. "They will not like this," Tana said quietly, reading the same tension in the yard that he had. "They don't have to like it. They just have to not shoot you before I get you inside." He kept his voice light, but his heart was hammering because Captain Doran ran this garrison, and Doran was not a man known for generosity toward orcs, treaty or no treaty. They made it inside without incident, though he felt eyes on his back the whole way, and it was only once the infirmary door shut behind them that he let himself breathe. Tana sat heavily on the edge of his examination table, looking around at the shelves of dried herbs, the neat rows of glass jars, the surgical tools laid out on cloth like a soldier's own weapons. "You live alone here," she said. It was not quite a question. "I do. No wife, no family in the station." "No." He busied himself at the basin, not looking at her, aware of exactly how much that single syllable admitted. "My father was a barber surgeon in Iron Reach City. I learned the trade from him before the border wars took most of the men my age who might have become friends. And by the time the fighting eased, I'd already built a life out here stitching up miners and soldiers instead. It suits me well enough." That is a lonely answer for a man who ran towards 6 armed strangers to save someone he had never met. He looked up at that, surprised by the bluntness of it, and found her watching him with an expression he could not quite name, something curious, something almost gentle beneath the wariness. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'd rather be lonely and useful than safe and sorry. Now hold still, I need to check that dressing again before you sleep." She let him work in silence after that, though her eyes tracked him the whole time, and Charles told himself firmly that the warmth climbing up the back of his neck was only the fire, and not the weight of an orc woman's gaze settling on him like a hand. They left Last Light Station before dawn the next morning, Charles with a fresh satchel and a borrowed horse from the garrison stables. A debt he'd have to repay in coin or favors later. He didn't much care which, and Tana walking beside him despite his insistence she ride, because, she informed him flatly, an orc did not sit idle while a human walked in the snow on her account. They argued about it for the better part of a mile before compromising. She would ride when the leg ached too badly to hide, and not a moment before. The low road wound up through stands of black pine and along the shoulders of the gorge, following the beacon towers north toward Kelbridge, and Charles found himself, despite the danger nipping at their heels, enjoying the journey in a way he had not expected. Tana was sharp-tongued and quick to laugh once she decided he was not going to flinch from her, and she teased him mercilessly about his careful, methodical way of doing everything, from how he packed his satchel to how he built their fire each night in precise, economical stacks of wood. "You build a fire like you are performing surgery on it," she said on the second night, watching him from across the flames with her boots off and her bad legs stretched toward the warmth. "Very tidy, very correct. Some of us like our fires to actually burn through the night instead of collapsing into ash by midnight. Some of us like a little chaos. It keeps a person humble." Her amber eyes glinted in the firelight, and something in the way she said it low, almost inviting, made his ears go hot despite the cold. He busied himself with the stew pot rather than answer, and did not miss the low laugh she gave at his expense. It was on the third night, camped in a hollow beneath an overhang of gray rock with the beacon fire of the next tower barely visible through the trees, that the danger caught up with them properly. Charles woke to Tana's hand clamped over his mouth and her voice a bare whisper in his ear. "Riders, 6, maybe 8, not Ironreach colors." They doused the fire and moved into the rocks above the hollow, and from there Charles watched, heart in his throat, as a band of mounted men in dark leathers picked through their abandoned camp below, overturning his satchel, kicking through the ashes. Orcs, most of them, but 2 humans among them as well, and one voice carried clearly up through the still night air. "Iron, I want her alive if we can manage it, but dead works just as well as long as it's before Kelbridge. Spread out." Charles felt Tana go rigid beside him, her hand finding the hilt of her long knife, and he understood in that moment with total clarity that this was no longer an abstract danger. Someone very powerful wanted her dead badly enough to send riders across the border corridor to do it. He also understood, with the same clarity, that he was not going to let that happen, and the strength of that certainty startled him more than the riders below did. They waited in silence for the better part of an hour until the riders gave up the search and moved on, and only then did Tana let out a long breath and lower her knife. "They will be watching the low road ahead now," she said. "We will need to go around through the quarry district instead. It adds a day. Then we lose a day." Charles said it simply, without hesitation, and felt her gaze on him again in the dark. "I told you I'd get you to Kelbridge. I meant it. You could have turned back at the bridge, healer. You could turn back now. This is not becoming safer." "I know." He met her eyes, steady despite the cold sweat still drying on his skin from the fear of the riders below. "I'm not turning back, Tana." It was the first time he had used her name without the title in front of it, and he watched something in her expression soften at the sound of it, quick and unguarded before she looked away into the dark. The detour through the quarry district brought them, on the 5th day, to Greystone Quarry itself, the mining settlement Charles knew well from years of treating its workers, and it was there that the trouble he had feared finally found them in the open, in front of 100 watching eyes. They arrived at midday, weary and travel-worn, meaning only to resupply at the quarry's trading post before pushing on, and it was Captain Doran's own second, a broad-shouldered sergeant named Wren, who spotted them crossing the market square and called out loud enough for the whole square to hear. "Walker, that the outlaw from the Stonebridge report. The one Ironjaw's men are hunting." Wren's men were already fanning out, hands on hilts, and a crowd of quarry workers and traders was gathering with the particular hunger of people who sensed a spectacle about to unfold. Orders from the captain himself. Any orc matching that description found consorting with border personnel is to be detained for questioning. That includes you, surgeon, unless you'd like to explain yourself right here. Charles felt the ground shift under the conversation in real time, understood exactly what was happening. Not an honest arrest, but a public humiliation being built brick by brick in front of an audience, meant to break something in both of them. If Tana fought her way free here, she would be branded a violent outlaw who assaulted kingdom soldiers in front of 100 witnesses, evidence enough to hang her before she ever reached Kelbridge. If Charles surrendered meekly, he would be marked forever as the healer who consorted with Orc Outlaws, his standing and his infirmary's future ruined in every border town from here to Ironreach. Wren wanted a story to tell, and he did not much care which of them paid for it. "I have not consorted with anyone, Sergeant," Charles said, keeping his voice level though his pulse hammered. "I've provided medical care to a traveler on a public road, which is my sworn duty under the Kelbridge Accord regardless of the traveler's blood. If Captain Doran wishes to question the details, I'll answer them at the station. There's no cause for a scene here. There's plenty of cause when the traveler's an outlaw with a bounty on her head." Wren drew his sword partway, more for show than intent, but the crowd's murmur sharpened at the sight of steel. "Kneel, orc. Hands where I can see them, and maybe the surgeon walks away from this without charges of his own." Charles felt Tana's hand brush his arm, the smallest touch, and braced for her to fight, braced for the chaos that would surely follow, the blood in the square, the ruin of everything. Instead, she stepped forward past him, chin high, and her voice rang out clear and unhurried across the whole gathered crowd. "I will not kneel to a sergeant playing at judge, but I will settle this the way my people settle disputes of honor before witnesses, if the sergeant has the courage for it." She let that hang a moment, watching Wren's face redden. Under the old accord, any accused may name a champion to answer for them in trial by combat, or may claim protection under the shared fire right of an ally who vouches for their conduct with their own name. I claim the shared fire right. I name Charles Walker of Last Light Station as the one under whose fire and protection I travel, and I declare before this crowd that any harm done to him for the crime of decency will be answered by my hand and my clans, treaty or no treaty. A murmur ran through the square, quarry workers and traders exchanging glances, because the shared fire right was old law even among humans who traded along the Clanhold's edge, older than Doran's garrison and better respected by the quarry folk who had lived beside orc neighbors for generations. Wren's sword hand faltered, his easy authority suddenly uncertain in the face of something his soldiers didn't fully understand and clearly didn't want to violate in front of witnesses who did. Charles understood, watching her, exactly what she had done. She had not fought his battle for him, had not swept in to save him like a man too weak to stand. She had turned the entire confrontation into a formal declaration of alliance under law both peoples recognized, one that named him not a victim to be rescued, but a protector worthy of an orc champion's open claim. He stood a little taller under the crowd's gaze, not shamed but honored, and he saw in Wren's hesitation that the sergeant had lost the square entirely. "The accord does recognize shared fire claims," an older quarry foreman called out from the crowd, arms crossed, clearly enjoying Wren's discomfort. "My grandfather stood witness to one 30 years back." "Best let it lie, Sergeant, unless you want to explain to the captain why you started a fight over old treaty law in front of half the quarry." Wren looked from the foreman to the murmuring crowd to Tana's unflinching amber stare, and made the only choice a man could make with his authority already crumbling. He sheathed his sword with a scowl and jerked his men back a step. "This isn't finished, Orc. Doran will hear of it." "Let him," Tana said. "I have nothing to hide from an honest hearing. I only object to being judged by men who have already decided my guilt before they've heard a single word of truth." The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with talk, and Charles found himself standing beside Tana in the thinning square, his heart still pounding but for an entirely different reason now than fear. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, once they were alone. "You could have just fought them. You'd have won. I could have won and made you into a story men tell the poor healer the Orc Outlaw had to save because he could not defend himself." Her eyes met his, fierce and unapologetic. "I would not do that to you. You stood in front of 6 armed men for me on that bridge without a weapon worth the name. I will not let a sergeant with more pride than sense strip that from you in front of strangers. You are not a man who needs saving, Charles Walker. You are a man worth standing beside." The words landed somewhere deep in his chest, in a place that had gone quiet and untended for years, and he had no ready answer for them. Only the sudden fierce urge to close the distance between them and never mind the watching windows of the quarry square. He did not do it. Not yet. But something had shifted between them in that moment, some final wall come down, and they both felt it settle into the space they now shared. They left the quarry district within the hour, unwilling to test Doran's patience further, and pushed north along the high-shoulder trail that climbed above the gorge toward Kelbridge, the sky above them thickening steadily from pale gray to something heavier and more bruised with every mile. "Storm coming," Tana said that evening, studying the clouds massing over the peaks ahead with a frown Charles had learned to take seriously. "Early for the season and fast. We should have reached the shelter huts by the ridge line before dark, but at this pace we will not make it. How bad? Bad enough that I would rather not be caught in the open when it breaks." They pushed on regardless, racing the light and the gathering cold, and it was full dark and beginning to snow in earnest by the time Tana's sharp eyes picked out a black seam in the rock face ahead, a cave mouth half hidden behind a fall of old scree, narrow but deep, tucked into the mountain's shoulder well above the trail. "There," she said, already turning the horse toward it. "It will have to do." They got inside just as the wind rose to a full scream behind them, snow driving nearly sideways across the trail they had left only minutes before, and Charles understood, dragging the horse in after them and working with numb fingers to block the cave mouth with brush and stacked stone, exactly how close they had come to being caught in the open, by what was now unmistakably a full mountain blizzard. The cave was small, barely large enough for the two of them and the horse to shelter together. A shallow hollow of stone, perhaps 12 feet deep, its ceiling low enough that Charles had to stoop near the back wall. Wind howled at the makeshift barrier they'd built, snow hissing through the gaps, and within an hour the temperature inside had dropped sharply enough that Charles's breath fogged visibly even near the small fire he managed to coax from their dwindling dry wood. "We cannot keep that fire burning all night," Tana said, watching the meager flame with a critical eye. "Not enough wood, and the smoke has nowhere good to go in a space this small. It will have to be banked low soon. Then we're in trouble once it goes out. I've seen men die of the cold in shelters not much worse than this. I know." She was already unbuckling the roll strapped behind her saddle, and from it she drew a single enormous fur, a full bear hide, cured and thick, clearly a prized possession she had carried the whole journey rolled tight against the weather. "I have one fur, healer. Warm enough for one, barely enough for two if they do not mind closeness." Charles felt his pulse spike at the plain practicality in her voice, though her eyes, when they met his across the low fire, held something less plain than practicality. "I don't mind closeness," he said, and found his voice rougher than he intended. "Good. Because pride will not keep either of us alive tonight, and I did not drag you this far through a blizzard to lose you to your own stubbornness now." They banked the fire low, wrapped themselves in every spare layer they carried, and settled together beneath the single fir with their backs to the deepest part of the cave wall, the horse dozing nearby, wind screaming outside like something alive and furious at being denied them. Charles lay stiff at first, achingly aware of every point where his body met hers, her back against his chest, her braided hair against his jaw, the solid warmth of her radiating through both their layers, until the cold finally won out over his self-consciousness, and he simply let himself relax into her. "You are very tense for a man sharing a fur," Tana murmured after a long while, not quite asleep, her voice low and amused in the dark. "I've never shared one with anyone before. Not since I was a boy, anyway, and my father and I huddled through a storm not much smaller than this one, the winter before he died." She went quiet at that, and then carefully she turned within the fur to face him, close enough that he could feel her breath warm against his cheek, close enough that in the last dying light of the fire he could see every detail of her face, the strong line of her jaw, the small silver scar above one brow, the fierceness in her eyes gentled now into something almost tender. "Tell me about him," she said. "Your father." So he did, in the dark of that small stone cave with the storm raging outside. He told her about the barber surgeon's shop in Iron Reach City, about learning to stitch wounds on old leather before he was ever allowed near a real patient, about his father's death from a winter fever that no amount of medicine could touch, about the years afterward when Charles had drifted to the border corridor, because there was more need there than anywhere else, and need, he'd found, was easier to bear than grief. And when he finished, feeling strangely lighter for having said it all aloud to someone for the first time in years, she told him her own story in turn. She told him about growing up in the Highhold Pass beneath cliffs that turned gold at dawn, about her grandmother, who had first carved the honor marks into the beads she now wore in her hair, about the day 3 winters past when an avalanche had sealed the only pass route during a hunting party's return, and she had spent 6 hours alone breaking through solid ice and packed snow with nothing but a war hammer and sheer refusal to let her people die trapped on the mountain. earning the name Skybreaker from clan elders, who had never before given such a title to one so young. She told him more quietly about Draven Ironjaw, how his clan had coveted the high-hold ore seams for a generation, how she believed without proof yet that he had orchestrated the caravan raid himself and paid Ironreach officials to look the other way while Stonehide took the blame, how the assassins on the bridge and the riders in the night were almost certainly his hired blades, sent to make certain she never reached Kelbridge to challenge the injustice at all. "If I win the proving," she said, "I clear more than my clan's name. I take back what was stolen, and I make Draven answer before both our peoples for what he has done." "If I lose," she stopped, and Charles felt her shoulders tighten beneath his arm. "You won't lose," he said with a certainty that surprised even him. "I've watched you fight two-handed with a broken spear while bleeding from an arrow wound. I don't think losing is something you know how to do." She laughed then, low and warm, and the sound of it in the dark, so close to him, undid something in his chest that had been tightly wound for a very long time. "You have known me 5 days, healer. 5 days is enough to know some things clearly. Is that so?" Her hand found his jaw in the dark, tracing the line of it with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the strength he had watched her wield on the bridge. "And what else do you know clearly in 5 days?" He should have hesitated. He did not. "That I have never in my life wanted to kiss anyone the way I want to kiss you right now, and that I've been trying very hard not to say that out loud for 3 days." "Then stop trying," Tana said, and closed the distance herself. The kiss was not gentle at first. She kissed the way she fought, with total commitment, one hand fisting in the front of his coat to pull him closer, and Charles met her with a hunger he hadn't known he was carrying, months and years of careful loneliness burning away in the heat of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his, tusks brushing gently against his jaw in a way that felt, somehow, achingly tender. "I have watched men flee from far less than what you have faced this week," she murmured, "and you have not flinched once, not from the arrows, not from the sergeant's blade, not from me." Her hand cupped his face, thumb tracing his cheekbone with a reverence that stole his breath. "Among my people, when a warrior wishes to claim someone as her own, she does not ask permission with soft words. She declares it before witnesses, or she seals it in a private hour like this one, with no witness but the fire and the storm. I am claiming you, Charles Walker. Not because you saved me on that bridge I would have managed, eventually, bleeding or not. Because you have chosen, again and again, on a road that offered you every reason to turn back, to stand beside me instead. That is not something I will let go of easily, once I have it. Do you yield to that claim, or do I need to convince you further?" "Convince me," he said, laughing breathlessly against her mouth, "just to be thorough." And she growled something low and pleased in her own tongue and kissed him again, and this time neither of them pulled away for a long while. What passed between them beneath that single fir, in the small warm hollow of stone with the blizzard howling its fury against the world outside, was not rushed and not careless. It was slow and deliberate and achingly gentle in places that surprised them both. Her strength gentled to something reverent, his careful hands finally unlearning caution. Two people who had each spent years certain that this particular kind of being wanted was not meant for them, discovering together that they had been wrong. When it was over they lay tangled beneath the fir with the fire reduced to embers, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing slow patterns along her arm, and outside the storm raged on, indifferent, while inside the cave neither of them had ever felt less alone. "I am not sorry the blizzard caught us," Tana admitted eventually, her voice drowsy and warm against his skin. "Neither am I," Charles said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. The storm broke by mid-morning, leaving the world outside scoured white and silent, and they dug their way free of the cave mouth to find the trail buried but passable, the horse restless and eager to move after a long, cramped night. They rode hard for the remaining 2 days to Kelbridge, urgency sharpened now by more than duty, by everything unspoken and newly spoken both between them, by the knowledge that whatever came at the proving, they would face it together. Kelbridge Hold rose out of the gorge like something grown from the rock itself, an ancient fortified bridge town spanning the deepest cut of the Greywatch March. Its great stones span wide enough for wagons, and lined with banner poles flying the colors of a dozen Orc clans, alongside the crossed hammer sigil of Ironreach Kingdom. The proving grounds occupied the flat shelf of rock on the northern bank, ringed with wooden stands already filling with spectators from both sides of the border, humans and orcs mingling with the particular wary courtesy of old enemies who had learned, mostly, to keep an uneasy peace. They arrived on the final morning before the trials began, and it was there, crossing the bridge itself amid the crowd, that disaster found them at last in its worst possible form. There. The voice rang out across the crowded span, and Charles turned to see a tall orc in dark iron-studded armor pointing directly at Tana, flanked by a dozen armed warriors bearing a black-and-red sigil Charles did not recognize, but felt, instantly, was trouble. Tana Skybreaker of the disgraced clan Stonehide, wanted for the murder of Ironreach caravan guards under treaty law. I Draven Ironjaw, chief of Clan Ironjaw, demand this outlaw be seized and answer for her crimes before she disgraces this proving further with her presence. The crowd's murmur turned instantly to a roar, spectators surging back from the confrontation even as Ironjaw's warriors, and to Charles's horror, a contingent of Ironreach garrison soldiers under Captain Doran himself closed in from both sides of the bridge, boxing Tana against the stone rail with nowhere to run. "This is a trial ground," Tana called out, drawing her long knife but making no move to attack, clearly aware that violence here would only confirm every accusation leveled against her. "I came to answer any charge before the proving's own judges, under treaty law, not to be seized on a bridge by an armed mob before I am even heard." "The judges have already ruled," Doran announced, stepping forward with a document Charles recognized with a sick lurch as an execution writ, sealed with the kingdom's own crossed hammer stamp. "New evidence arrived this morning from Ironjaw's own scouts, a confession from a captured caravan raider naming Stonehide clan directly. The sentence for murder under the accord is death by blade, carried out publicly before the proving begins, as a warning to any clan that thinks treaty law can be broken without consequence." They dragged her to the center of the bridge's wide stone shelf as the crowd packed in around the spectacle, hundreds of eyes watching, orc and human alike, as Ironjaw's own executioner, a broad brute of a warrior with a curved blade already drawn, forced Tana to her knees at the rail's edge. She fought them every step, but with 6 warriors pinning her arms and legs, even her strength could not break free in time, and Charles watched in pure animal horror as the executioner raised the blade high, sunlight catching along its edge, the crowd falling into a hush of anticipation, and in some quarters ugly satisfaction. "Stop!" Charles's voice tore out of him before he had consciously decided to move, and he was already shoving through the crowd, through startled onlookers and armed men alike, driven by nothing but raw refusal to let this happen a single second later than it already had. He reached the inner ring just as the blade began its downward arc and threw himself bodily between Tana and the executioner, catching the flat of the descending sword against his raised forearm hard enough to crack bone, the impact driving him to his knees beside her, but stopping the blade dead a hand's width from her bared neck. The crowd's gasp was audible even over the wind off the gorge. "You have the wrong confession," Charles gasped, cradling his shattered arm but not moving from where he knelt shielding her, blood already soaking through his sleeve. "I treated that caravan raider myself 3 weeks ago at Last Light Station, brought in half-dead by Ironjaw's own men after a supposed border skirmish. A man named Fen Cutter, who I stitched up and who, in his fever, confessed to me, and to 2 garrison witnesses that he'd been paid by Ironjaw's own steward to raid that caravan and plant Stonehide markings at the scene. I have his sworn statement, signed and witnessed, in my satchel this very moment, because I suspected then and I know now that this confession was bought, not given freely." He fumbled the document free with his good hand, holding it aloft with his broken arm shaking at his side, and Captain Doran, to his credit, strode forward and took it, scanning the ink with a face gone gray. "This is dated 3 weeks past," Doran said slowly, looking up at Draven Ironjaw with new suspicion hardening across his features. "Witnessed by 2 of my own men at Last Light Station. If this is genuine, Chief Ironjaw, then the confession your scouts delivered this morning is either false or coerced, and you have just attempted to execute an innocent woman on this bridge in front of every clan gathered for the proving." The crowd's mood shifted like a physical thing, murmurs of outrage rippling outward as word passed back through the packed onlookers, and Draven Ironjaw's face twisted with the particular fury of a man watching a carefully built lie collapse in public. He made one desperate lunge for his own blade, perhaps meaning to silence Charles for good, but a dozen orc warriors from other clans, sensing blood in the political water, had already stepped forward to restrain him, their loyalty to fair treaty law outweighing whatever debts they owed Ironjaw's coin. "Release her," Doran ordered, and Ironjaw's men, leaderless in the sudden chaos and unwilling to defy a direct kingdom order in front of so many witnesses, let Tana go. She was at Charles's side in an instant, cradling his shattered arm with a tenderness utterly at odds with the fury still blazing in her eyes toward Ironjaw. "You absolute fool," she breathed, half laughing, half weeping, pressing her forehead to his. "You threw yourself in front of an execution blade with a bad arm and a healer's satchel." "Seemed like the moment for it," Charles managed through gritted teeth, the pain finally catching up to him now that the danger had passed. The proceedings that followed took the better part of the afternoon. Fen Cutter himself was located, still recovering at Last Light Station, and dragged before the assembled clan judges to repeat his confession sober and unthreatened, which he did, having no love left for a paymaster who'd left him to bleed on a border road. Draven Ironjaw was stripped of his chieftainship on the spot by his own clan elders, unwilling to be dragged down with a leader so thoroughly disgraced before every rival clan gathered to witness it, and Stonehide's standing was restored in full by unanimous judgment, its right to send a champion to the proving reinstated with an apology carved formally into the treaty stone that would stand at Kelbridge for a generation. Tana still competed in the proving 3 days later, once Charles's arm was properly splinted and the worst of the chaos had settled, and she competed like a woman with nothing left to prove and everything already won, defeating challenger after challenger through trials of strength and endurance with a ferocity that left the crowds roaring her name by the final match. When she was declared victor, Highhold Pass and its ore seam secured for Clan Stonehide for the year to come, she did not run to the cheering crowd or her own clan elders first. She came to where Charles stood at the rail with his arm in its sling, and in front of every gathered clan and every kingdom official still present, she knelt before him, an act of open declaration no one in that crowd could mistake for anything but exactly what it was. "Among my people," she said, loud enough to carry, "when a warrior has won the right to choose her own hearth, she offers the one she has chosen the warmest place at her fire before all who would witness it, as proof of her protection and her claim. I offer that place to you, Charles Walker, field surgeon of Last Light Station, who bled beneath my blade rather than see me fall, who has never once flinched from what I am. Will you take it?" The crowd had gone utterly silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the two of them, and Charles felt every bit of his old careful loneliness finally, fully dissolve. "I'll take it," he said, voice rough, "if you'll take mine in return. I don't have much of a hearth to offer, but what's there has been cold a long time, waiting for someone worth warming it for." "Then it is settled," Tana said, rising to pull him into a kiss that drew a roar of approval from half the watching crowd and scandalized muttering from the other half. neither of which either of them particularly cared about in that moment. They stayed at Kelbridge through the winter that followed, Charles tending both the Ironreach garrison and the visiting clan warriors alike from a shared infirmary. The two peoples finally agreed to fund together, a small but real crack in generations of mutual suspicion. Tana took up her seat among Stonehide's restored council, riding the Highhold Pass in patrol some weeks and returning to Kelbridge in others, and every single time she returned, without fail, she found Charles waiting with the fire built high and the warmest place at it kept open, exactly as promised. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had trapped them together in that narrow stone cave, they returned to it once more, this time by choice rather than necessity, carrying the same worn bear-hide fur between them up the mountain trail. They spent the night there again, wrapped together against a cold far gentler than the one that had first brought them close, and in the morning, standing at the cave mouth with the whole white mountain world spread out below them and Tana's hand warm and certain in his, Charles Walker understood with total clarity that he was, for the first time in longer than he could remember, exactly where he belonged, chosen by a woman who could have had anyone and had wanted, of all the world, only him. "No more lonely hearths, healer," Tana murmured against his hair, pulling the fur closer around them both. "No more lonely hearths," Charles agreed, and meant it with everything he had.